The wind was colder than usual the morning Ethan Hale signed the papers for the abandoned dairy. It clawed at his jacket as if trying to warn him that he was stepping into something far bigger than a piece of forgotten land. The sky was a pale gray sheet, thick with the promise of rain, and the gravel crunched beneath his boots in a way that felt too loud for the emptiness around him. He had come expecting silence, dust, and the smell of old hay. Instead, as he pulled up to the gate after signing the final documents, his breath froze halfway in his chest because the once deserted dairy farm was no longer deserted. A row of black SUVs lined the dirt road. Men in tactical gear formed a perimeter. A full security team, armed, alert, and powerful, was guarding his property as if it were a classified government site. Everything inside him quivered. Something was happening here, something hidden, something dangerous, something meant to stay buried. And he had just bought it. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and stories that dig deep into the human heart, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to channel name. Your support keeps these stories alive. Ethan stood at the gate for a long time, questioning whether he had made the worst mistake of his life. The dairy had been sold cheap because it had been abandoned for years, no owner stepping forward, no heirs, no claims. It was supposed to be a simple investment, a chance to rebuild after a brutal year that had taken his job, his savings, and his sense of direction. He was trying to create a place of peace and purpose, a small sanctuary away from the noise of the world. But nothing about the scene before him resembled peace. The security team looked like they were guarding something or someone. His heart thumped heavily as he stepped forward, feeling the weight of every secret that might lie beyond the rusted gates. The men didn't speak. They simply watched him with a level of seriousness that made the air feel thinner. Ethan's mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. Maybe the previous owner wasn't as gone as the documents claimed. Maybe this land was being used for something illegal. Maybe he had walked into someone else's war without knowing it. All he knew was that the official record said abandoned, the bank said unclaimed, and his contract said rightful owner. So why was he suddenly being treated like an intruder on the very land he now legally possessed? As he walked deeper into the property, the truth revealed itself in fragments, footprints in the mud that weren't his, freshly repaired fencing, tire marks from vehicles far heavier than anything a dairy farm would need. There was movement inside the barn. Not the kind of movement that belonged to animals, but the subtle thud of equipment, the distant metallic sound of crates being shifted, and the faint echo of voices trying not to be heard. The tension crawled inside Ethan's bones, and for the first time in months, he felt fear heavier than the grief he carried. Inside the main barn, the dust had been cleaned away. The lights were on. The air was warm. And standing near the milking stalls was something completely unexpected, a small, makeshift medical setup, blankets, water bottles, and signs that people had been living here. Ethan's confusion deepened when he realized these weren't criminals or hired mercenaries working for a cartel. They were refugees. Families. People with hollow eyes and trembling hands. A secret group being protected by a quiet, organized team whose real purpose wasn't violence, it was shielding these vulnerable people from it. Ethan learned slowly, carefully, and painfully that the dairy wasn't abandoned, it had been turned into a hidden shelter. Many of the refugees were survivors of conflicts far from here, smuggled through dangerous routes seeking safety. The security team wasn't guarding illegal dealings, they were guarding lives, fragile, frightened lives clinging to a sliver of hope. What tore Ethan open emotionally was discovering a little girl, no more than 9, sitting beside a heater with a notebook in her lap. Her dark hair was braided unevenly, her clothes worn but clean, and her eyes filled with a heaviness no child should ever carry. She looked at Ethan the way someone looks at the world when they've run out of places to run. In that moment, something inside him cracked wide open. He had come here to rebuild himself, but perhaps life had brought him here to help rebuild others. Over the following days, Ethan sat with the security team's leader, a volunteer heading a discreet humanitarian network. They couldn't risk government involvement because the refugees were undocumented and had narrowly escaped severe violence. The shelter was temporary, a stop before relocation far from danger. But the system was overwhelmed, and the dairy had become a desperate sanctuary. Ethan could have said no. He could have demanded they leave, called the authorities, or walked away entirely. But as he watched the small community trying to survive winter in silence, he realized that maybe this wasn't a burden, it was a responsibility placed in his hands for a reason he didn't yet understand. Ethan decided to help. Not by force or obligation, but because the hollow ache in his chest, born from losing his family in a tragic accident, finally found a reason to beat again. He cleaned out the remaining barns, set up heaters, cooked simple meals, repaired broken doors, and created a safe routine that gave the refugees a sense of stability. It wasn't perfect, and fear still lingered like a shadow, but for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt alive. As weeks passed, the little girl who once hid behind her mother began sitting outside with Ethan while he worked. She watched him fix fences, feed stray cats, patch roofs, and build makeshift lights. She drew pictures of the dairy, bright, colorful, filled with sun instead of gray clouds. She smiled more, spoke more, laughed quietly at the goats he adopted to make the place feel more like a home. Ethan found himself healing through her gentle presence, her resilience, and the subtle message she carried: even broken people can bring light to broken places. When the relocation finally came, the dairy became a place of tears and bittersweet farewells. The security team prepared the families to move to a safer region, papers arranged, transportation ready, futures uncertain but more hopeful than before. The little girl hugged Ethan tightly, leaving behind her notebook filled with drawings. On the last page, she had drawn him fixing a fence with the sun rising behind him. Under it, she wrote in shaky handwriting, "You fixed more than the farm." When the dairy emptied out, Ethan stood alone in the vast, quiet land, no security team, no hidden community, no echoes of urgent footsteps. But the silence no longer felt suffocating. It felt meaningful. The farm, once a forgotten shell, had been a bridge between despair and hope for people who needed it most. And in helping them stand, Ethan had found the strength to stand again himself. He rebuilt the dairy, slowly, deliberately, turning it into a legitimate sanctuary for others, a rehabilitation farm for survivors, run legally, peacefully, and with a heart carved from everything he had learned in those strange, life-altering months. People came broken and left stronger. And every sunset reminded him of a little girl who taught him that purpose sometimes arrives disguised as chaos. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to channel name. Your support helps these emotional stories reach more people who might need a moment of hope. Special request: before you leave, please comment below. Hope always finds a home.